We had a caller from Grant County that was asking a question about Governor Dayton's State of the State. Of course, he had the State of the State address last evening, which is quite a bit later than we traditionally see it. This was a question about a specific portion of the speech, but there's also a couple other questions just generally about the State of the State. So tell me, what were your views on the State of the State, either on generally the State of the State speech or the timing of it, perhaps?
Well, it was the latest since sometime in the 1800s, I believe, that the State of the State has been presented. And there are some good reasons for that. The governor has had some health issues. He's had some surgery, et cetera. But the issue there is that most of the work we're going to do this session has been done. Now, the major bills are either passed and signed or sitting in conference committee. He did talk quite a bit about the bonding bill. He would like to make it bigger. Some of us don't think that's such a great idea. But it also is kind of close to the campaign, and there was a bit of I would say, a campaign flavor to the speech. He spent quite a bit of time going over what he thinks are the accomplishments of his administration.
Yeah, the health issues the governor's had to deal with, we all understand that, and we all eventually have that in ourselves, and unfortunately it happened to hit him right at the time when session was starting, but it appears that he's rebounding quite well, but exactly, it's people need to know that it's politics and it's election year, and the accomplishments were talked about by the governor, and we may sometimes disagree on whether those accomplishments were and how they came about. With the economy rebounding the way it does, it was a natural rebound. I mean, we all have to admit that the economy's been coming back. It's been coming back slow, but part of the reason we're out of this debt that we were dealing with is because we raised significant taxes 2 years ago, and the governor said that there was a little bit of an overreach, and I think. Now some of those are coming back to the folks, and not all of them, but some of them are coming back in the way of some tax relief, which none of us are going to disagree with that, especially in this time when people are coming out of this recession. So,
Representative Lean, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I think some of what I appreciated from his speech last night is, I think, going forward, where the governor, and I do agree with him as well, where the governor would like to see us put focus in education in terms of more early childhood education, more early childhood programs. And the studies are there, the statistics are there, that when we're able to address some of these issues early on, we do close that achievement gap. And if that achievement gap is left unaddressed, that can be a significant drag on gross domestic product, I think. Right now, if we are able to close that achievement gap, we'd be able to pick up, 2 to 3% in terms of more economic output for our state's gross domestic product. So I was appreciative to hear that, and that's certainly an issue that I do think we need to take on. And I do think it's a new issue, kind of a new generational or a new issue that folks maybe haven't looked at in the past as much, and something that I think really would benefit our state if we were able to get a hold of that and address it early.
I think the governor's major theme last night was jobs, and by the way, we started about March 1st, so this probably wasn't right as we're starting to wrap things up. Maybe a little, kick in the rear end from the governor didn't hurt anything last night, but. I think he talked about what was done last year in terms of the Mayo project, the stadium. He didn't talk about the Mall of America, but of course that's doubled in size with the help of the state of Minnesota. The new R&D out of 3M, a number of projects where we have jobs, and we'll have jobs into the future because of the investments that we've made. So. I think he continued to talk about that when he was talking about the bonding bill. And as we've already talked about tonight, I think that the Lewis and Clark water line is a great example of an investment that maybe there wasn't anybody who thought because we thought the federal government was probably going to help us out a little more, maybe we didn't think we'd have to invest quite as much in that. But I'm one person who thinks that particular water line is really key to a large part, a key part of Minnesota, and we're going to have to probably invest a little more money. Hence, that's the reason why I think he thinks the bonding bill ought to be a little higher.